Great. So, who is the National Housing Conference? I like to call us the Unlikely Coalition. When we were founded, our founder, a woman named Mary Kinsbury Simkovich, was a social worker in New York and realized people were not listening to her talk about why we needed to do this because it's the right thing to do and because people are suffering. Half the people in New York City were living in substandard housing, slums that didn't even have running water or electricity. I know you're all familiar with those conditions, and in many parts of the United States, to some extent, that still exist. So her vision was to create a coalition of builders, labor unions, religious leaders, and social advocates, and really make it about creating jobs. So our first slogan was "Jobs is housing, and housing is jobs." And today we have members from all different sectors of, including local governments, service firms, law firms, nonprofit housing developers and intermediaries, and national associations of all kinds, including the biggest banks in the country. No one group is more than 20% of our membership, and that's really served us very well. When we think about what we do, we have been involved in the writing of every National Housing Act in American history, starting with the National Industrial Recovery Act in 1933. Our founder was very close with the First Lady of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt, and we were involved in writing the National Housing Act of 1937, which you can see here is a letter that Franklin Roosevelt wrote to the senator who wrote the bill, saying, "I'd like to talk to you about affordable housing when I get back from Warm Springs." And I believe that Vice President Biden was just in Warm Springs this week. And and at the bottom is a note to Eleanor. This is referring to NHC's request. So I think if you can get on the president's honey-do list as an organization, you're doing pretty good.
Sure. David, can I ask you to share your screen as full screen? Is that possible?
Oh, yes. Let me try this.
Slideshow. I think then it will be easier for everyone to see the text.
Yes, thanks for asking. Let's see here, slideshow from the beginning. How's that?
That's better. Thank you. Yeah, that's
great.
Much better.
So let's talk a little bit about affordable housing. And, affordable housing is a strong contributor to the financial, emotional, and physical well-being of households and community. There are many, many benefits. It can lower healthcare costs. It improves long-term health. It reduces mental stress and increased emotional well-being. Better academic performance among children is a result. There is stronger employment opportunities and economic mobility. Obviously, it prevents homelessness and creates a more robust state and local tax base. There is extensive research on all of these areas that make this case. I'm going to discuss some of the benefits a little more in depth, and then we'll move on to some of the policy solutions. So when we talk about reducing healthcare costs, the global pandemic has certainly served as a reminder of the important role secure, affordable housing plays in influencing health outcomes. Indeed, affordable housing is linked to both reduced healthcare costs and positive outcomes. As the chart illustrates, all housing types, including families, seniors, people with disabilities, and those living in supportive housing, saw a reduction in their monthly healthcare spending after moving into affordable housing. The average reduction in cost was 12%, according to Enterprise Community Partners. Residents of affordable housing also experience fewer doctor visits, reflecting better health and resulting in reduction in spending. Affordable housing was linked to an 18% decline in emergency room visits. And I think this is really important because we are starting to experiment in this country with partnering with hospitals and health insurance companies and other healthcare providers, because a disproportionate amount of their emergency healthcare costs result from people who are unhoused coming in and basically using emergency rooms as their source of healthcare. And that drives up costs. And by monetizing the benefits of that, you can actually create affordable housing opportunities. More than simply driving down costs, affordable housing is associated with better access to quality health care, which clearly influences healthcare results. You can see here that 54% of renters delay medical care because it's unaffordable. And this is linked to lower rates of chronic diseases and childhood mortality. And securing housing is associated with improved mental health. Households with affordable housing spent 34% of their income on food and 9% on healthcare. And cost-burdened households spend only 18% on food and 4% on healthcare. So it's also clear that the lives of children are significantly improved by the benefits of affordable housing. For example, children living in households that moved to lower poverty neighborhoods using a housing voucher, in effect allowing them to gain access to affordable housing, earned 30% more as adults and enjoyed greater overall housing stability. And every year a child spends in a better neighborhood and safer home environment improves their adult outcomes, including college attendance and higher income. Indeed, affordable housing is linked to childhood academic performance in a number of ways, including, but not limited to, reducing the frequency of disruptive moves, improving parents' ability to spend on child enrichment, and supporting community development with funding for schools and after-school activities. A recent report compared the academic performance of children whose parents received housing assistance, giving them access to affordable housing, to similarly situated households without assistance. Regardless of the demographic, all of the children received housing assistance had stronger math test scores. That's from a study by the Urban Institute, and they do a lot of great research here in the United States. The positive impacts of affordable housing seen across physical and mental health, family stability, household finance, and childhood development spill over into neighborhoods and communities. At the local level, affordable housing is linked to greater civic participation, economic growth, a reduction in homelessness, and greater tax collection. For every 100 affordable housing units constructed, the local economy saw 161 new jobs created, $11.7 million in income generated, and $2.2 million in taxes and other revenues for local governments. These numbers certainly make a compelling case for proactive policy and legislation to support greater access to affordable housing. So let's take a look at some of the tools that we use here in the United States. One of the most effective and impactful is the low-income housing tax credit. There are homeowner tax benefits, some of which we have now and some which are being considered as part of this presidential campaign you may have heard about. There's the new markets tax credit. There are opportunity zones, and there are rental tax credits. So there's a wide range of tax credits that we use here in this country. And so you're aware, tax credits are a reduction in one way or another of the amount of tax that either individuals or companies pay. And we've found there are ways to monetize those tax benefits and apply them to usually the equity of affordable housing. The most impactful is the low-income housing tax credit. It's been responsible for the creation of 2.5 million affordable housing units since it was created in 1986. There are 106,000 units or so put into place every year. The mortgage interest deduction is the largest federal subsidy, and it provides savings directly to taxpayers, and it has enduring popularity. Although it does provide large savings, the benefits primarily in order to higher income households. This is done by having the homeowner is able to deduct the amount of interest that they pay in their home, giving them the benefit of a significant reduction in their income taxes. Recently, in our tax reform bill 2 years ago, the homeowner tax credit really was significantly reduced through a couple of means, and now we're looking at new ways to really be more impactful for the money that we spend on this. One of them has been recommended by Vice President Biden, which is a down payment tax credit of $15,000 for all first-time home buyers to offset the cost of home buying. This tax credit would be permanent and advanceable, so homeowners would receive the funds when they make the purchase of the house, so it can be applied to their down payment instead of when they file their taxes the following year. The New Markets Tax Credit is a very interesting program. It incentivizes community development and economic growth through tax credits that attract private investment to distressed communities. And the way this program works is that we have an organization called the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund at the U.S. Treasury Department, and it allocates tax credit authority to what we call community development entities through a competitive application process. CDEs, or community development entities, are financial intermediaries through which private capital flows from an investor to a qualified business located in a low-income community. CDEs use their authority to offer tax credits to investors in exchange for equity in the CDE. So like with the low-income housing tax credit, we're selling the tax relief, which is purchased by high taxpayers to raise equity. The New Markets Tax Credit is particularly effective at attracting long-term capital to low-income neighborhoods and rural communities that lack adequate capital to support development. New Markets Tax Credits generate $8 of private investment for every dollar of federal funding. And since 2001, $61 billion in tax credits have been awarded. Another program which has been popular during this current Trump administration has been the creation of opportunity zones. These are meant to encourage long-term investments in low-income communities. Investors can defer taxes on unrealized capital gains by rolling these gains into funds that invest in low-income areas. There are literally trillions of dollars of income or revenue from unrealized capital gains that is basically sitting on the sidelines that could be steered into community development. Opportunity zones are an effort to do that. And the zones engage project developers and investors with a limited engagement in community development work. So really anybody is able to use them. And if the investment is allowed in the geography that's been established by the state, the local government, then you can use the tax benefit. And we're looking to reform that if there is a new administration, and better target it and have better information gathering. But I think the opportunity zones still have a lot of opportunity. The rental tax credit is a new proposal that would realign federal housing subsidies, and it supports all types of communities, including rural, urban, and a variety of incomes and local industries. A majority of low-income families are renters, so the credit would be especially well suited at making housing affordable. And part of the issue is that the market generally doesn't support low-income housing well. The rents tend to be higher, and instead of just homeowners receiving a tax credit, this is designed so that renters can receive one and lower their rent by being able to move some of their tax liability directly into cash that can pay their rent. That's the overall presentation, and we have some time for questions. I would be happy to go into more detail on any of these, and in the meantime, very interested in hearing from you all. So, and any questions you have at all. Like I say, you may have heard we have an election here. So obviously people are very interested in that and what that means for housing, as well as the rest of our country, as well as the rest of the world, as you are well aware.
Yeah. David, thank you very much. That was excellent, and also really inspiring just to think about how you've been able to, well, first of all, to amass all of this evidence to demonstrate the significant role that housing plays, well, in people's lives, and that's tangible in terms of education outcomes, health outcomes, and so on. And I suppose it's intuitive, isn't it? But then when you can show the numbers, you can then justify the expenditure.
Yes, I think that's important, is that it is intuitive. It makes plenty of sense that if you're not worried about where you're going to live or how you're going to manage to pay your rent when it's half or more of your income, that you're going to be in a better state of mind, that your kids are going to be able to focus on school better. You're going to be more likely to be involved in your community. They're all things we want. I think one of the challenges is taking that anecdotal evidence and then taking the research that backs it up and figuring out how to monetize it. And so in the health care area in particular, we've really focused on how do you actually quantify the improvement in all of these conditions in terms of in terms of the state or local government expenses or corporate expenses. An employer-assisted housing program where an employer, say, gives $10,000 to an employee to buy a home. But in return for that, the employee has to agree that they will accept a forgivable loan. So over time, I'm going to be responsible for paying this back unless I stay at the company. And so that forgivable loan is forgiven over time that I stay at the company. That helps the company retain workers and lowers their costs for recruiting and training. What we find is when employers offer this, they try to structure it so that they'll be able to recoup the funds. But often what they'll see is they're actually making money on it because they're saving more money than they're giving employees. And after doing it for a while, they decide we need to increase the amount because we don't actually want to make money on the program. So some of these can be very successful. Healthcare companies have also found this in reducing what they call their high flyers, people who are homeless, who end up getting all of their health care in the emergency room which is often not covered by insurance.
Sure. There's a question from a colleague, in fact, a former board member of the AUHF, Dr. Chi Akpoji, and she's a housing expert in Nigeria. And she asks if you could please clarify what affordable housing and affordable rental means in the American context. Is it linked to income levels? And just so
Yes.
that we can consider how it relates to our context.
Absolutely. So the way we do it in the United States is we have set up tiers of income, and the income is based on your area median income. So your area median income is in the metropolitan area that you may live in. And that may be in rural areas in states, it may be in cities and their surrounding areas. And so, for instance, Johannesburg would be in a different area than Cape Town would be. And there would be a different average income in those cities. And there might be small differences. There could be a large difference. There could be a large difference, for instance, from the area median income in Soweto, from Johannesburg. And so how we define it is extremely low income would be people who are at 30% or less of the area median. Low income would be 30 to 80%. And the moderate income would be 80 to 120. And different programs may have different tweaks on that, but generally that's how we look at it. And it's the hardest area actually for us to really address is the 80 to 120 space, because in high cost areas, housing costs are much, much higher. And so people who are not poor, but they're not wealthy, often find housing can be the most expensive. If you're at 30% or less of area median income, you often qualify for public housing. We don't have enough public housing in the United States, but if you can get it, your housing costs are significantly less. The other thing I would say is that as a benchmark of what's affordable, we use 30% of your income. So no more than 30% of your annual income should be used towards housing.
Okay. Interesting. There's a question from Anat Suchak asking about green housing, and are your members interested in that? Is that something that you've been exploring? Have you been looking afield for experiences?
We are, and so there are two principal reasons for supporting green housing. One is that it saves energy costs, and the other has a lower carbon footprint. And in the energy costs, that can often be monetized, but carbon footprint is something that really is a matter of national priority. We have certainly found that housing is much more energy efficient in general than it has been in the past. It is an important priority of consumers, which drives much of that interest. Double pane windows is a big, it really is the standard now. But at the same time, there's resistance to the additional costs when there is some. And as you may be aware, there is a raging debate in the United States over climate change. Some people are climate deniers. They say that it isn't actually happening. But I think much of that is really driven by a fear of the disruption of changing the economy to make us have less of an impact.
Yeah. I mean, what strikes me from everything that you've said, I mean, from the quality of the analysis of these linkages, and then the sophistication of your tax regime, and how that intersects with housing policy, and that's a conversation that you've managed to achieve in the United States. Often those conversations are separate in our jurisdictions. All of that reinforces something that I, the AUHF, and then my organization, CAF, the Center for Affordable Housing Finance, holds dear, is how important data is. and good
Yeah.
data to enable everything that we say. Well, let's investigate if that's actually as it is indeed. There are so many areas where I'd love to carry on this conversation. Some particular points where there's research we've been doing that I think I'd love for your reflection on. So I do hope we can carry this on further into the future. And we would love to host you in South Africa, but I'm sure I can speak for colleagues across the continent. Your counterpart, incidentally, is our chairman, Andrew Chimpunda. He's in Kenya, so you might want to via Kenya as well when you come visit, and I'm sure you'd find good hosts there as well. Thank you very
Kenya
much.
as well as South Africa are on my bucket list, so I'm sure we'll be able to make that happen someday.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, I really appreciate the time you've taken and for getting up so early this morning to join us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me. Let's do it again, maybe not at 3:30 in the morning.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Okay.
Thanks
Take care.
very much, David.
Bye-bye now.